Welcome to the launch of the Blindspot. We're really thrilled to have all of you, and we know participants from Norway, from Canada, and especially close to my heart, from South Africa, joining us now. And I'm delighted to be here with, on the far end, my co-author, Martin Henwood, with our guest panelists who have very generously come, Sam Simon, Jezz Brown, and Nada Aboserie. I wonder if you'd all like to just give a warm welcome, particularly to Nada, who completed her Hajj a few weeks ago. We're going to begin by asking Martin and then me to take 3 minutes each to summarise what's in the book. And then we invite our three panellists to say something about what it stirred up for them and what kind of conversation about power they think our society really needs now. Martin.
Hello. So, if you open this wonderful book and read its pages, what will you be discovering? You'll be encountering over 60 incidents of people in their working lives and in other situations. Incidents which we describe from personal experiences that they've been shared with us, and also some that are on the public record. So one of them is an incident in which somebody called Layla came into my church and she sat down beside me and she said, "I'm a civil servant, I've been working for my manager and I was put on a project, I knew I could do it, I volunteered, but when I got to work, all of my ethnic community said, we're going to sabotage it." And she said, "I've lost my job." And she said, "Do you think that might have something to do with the fact that I've been campaigning about domestic abuse in my own community?" That's one incident. There's another incident in which an ambulance driver who chatted to me, and he said, "I had to give up work simply because there was not the emotional support that I needed at a critical time. I was sent to a pregnant woman of 16 weeks, and the operator on 999 had said to this woman, 'The ambulance driver will save your child's life.' It's an impossibility. And so he accompanied the woman and the dead fetus to hospital and was just met with coldness. The other incident that I will share with you is the shock that an entrepreneur had, working for years, putting together a business he could sell to the market. He'd asked his best friend to be the chair. Just before it was sold, the chair sacked him. This was a friend he'd helped out 2-3 years earlier. And he got none of the millions that that company made, but his friend did. So we talk about something of the brutality of power, but we also say it's a book about surprises. So there's one account of a person at work, a woman who surprised herself by saying, "If you do that, if you dare do that, I'm going to punch you in the nose." She hadn't a clue where suddenly that power from within her arose. You'll also read of the account of a Nigerian woman who was 90 years old in hospital. She had fluid retention and the nurses left her in her own urine and at times naked. But in the book you'll read of something wonderful she did that completely turned and traversed the situation upside down, so that the very next day the nurses that looked down her nose were looking in admiration at her. And so finally, the surprise I really want to share with you about the book is that the exploration of power leads us into an appreciation of its actual beauty and its wonder, and how it really is quite something extraordinary to work with.
Martin and I figure as perpetrators as well as victims in a number of the incidents in the book. We are in no sense separate from the patterns that we describe. Knowledge can begin when you become curious about something that's been hiding in plain sight. What Martin and I became curious about was why, across many, many, many incidents of the kinds that he's just mentioned, the protagonists had no knowledge which prepared them for these challenges. This was true for incidents which happened in boardrooms, on the fast track to boardrooms, at middle, professional and executive levels, and in the front line, everywhere. The Blindspot is a detective story. In it, the incidents keep coming, but a methodical line of inquiry is pursued. We ask, is there knowledge about power? If so, what kinds? Who is in the know? How does the knowledge get passed on? Or not? We build that picture step by step. One chapter is called Power First Aid, but we also examine poetry, philosophy, and psychology. In fact, the poetry comes in the chapter called Power First Aid, because if you are ever in a situation of acute power stress or distress, you will need words that can puncture through the terror or the habit or the aloneness or the fear that might be gripping you. We lay out quite a lot of knowledge about power. We also show that an impactful, rigorous curriculum about power would be teachable in secondary schools. And then we test, through 2 school pilots, whether 17-year-olds would be interested in it. The answer is a vigorous yes, provided that you level with them without reservation. Our aim in the Blindspot, our promise to you in the Blindspot, is to level with you without reservation. Detective stories turn incidents and methodological inquiry into edge-of-your-seat endings. So try these 6 conclusions on for size. 1. Our elite leaders, whether political, business, religious, or other, understand very little about power. 2. This blind spot extends to presidents, plumbers, professors, and police officers alike, landing all of us in a predicament which is unnecessary, bizarre, and unethical. 3. We are living through peak blind spot. It's going to get better. 4. We can accelerate that change. Within the lifetimes of Sam, Nada, and Jezz, we can bring about the first power-literate generation. 5. When we have done so, how we educate about power today will look exactly like how we educated about sex in the 1950s. 6. In the future, to be taught to understand power safely will be every child's right. And tomorrow's 17-year-olds, and yes, we mean all of them, will understand more about power than today's Paula Venables, CEO of the Post Office during that tragedy, Elon Musk, or Peter Mandelson. So hopefully those 6 conclusions are enough for £16.99. What does it take to justify such conclusions? Brutal honesty in facing a wide range of whole of society evidence, method and logic, deep curiosity, some courage, no wishful thinking. This is what we have done our best to offer.
Thank you, Douglas. So, hi everyone. I have to admit I come to this as a curious late bloomer to knowledge about power, and I think that's really relevant for the conversation here. I'm an elder millennial. That means I was born in the early 80s. I was born and lived and raised in London in a working class family by a single mum. And we had, for knowledge, the Royal Britannia Encyclopedia. So I'm aging myself, but I'm showing that that's my route of knowledge. And I think that was really relevant because what this book stirred up in me was a wow moment. It felt like a missing manual. It felt like something I really had needed in my 20s. So it catapulted me to my first kind of corporate experience of power imbalance that I faced as a Black woman in technology, where I was underpaid, I was systemically underpaid. And it's interesting because this story has two sides to it. There was the element of the structural power that was at play, but also the understanding that because of my background, I didn't have the knowledge to negotiate. I didn't have the understanding that I could argue for my worth and make that happen. The second part of this, which is really powerful, was that actually I found out 16 years later, because I did get a pay rise magically a couple of years later. Okay. And I actually found out that one of my colleagues had used her expert power to threaten to resign in order to get that to happen. So power, that the book really transported me into that moment. The first moment where I felt something was off, but also the second moment where I had a lovely coffee catch up with my friend who'd moved to New Zealand and said to me, did I not mention that I'd done that? And I said, no, but I knew something was sus, so I had left. So that was the first thing it did. It really took me back to my own experience. The second thing it made me do then was think about, okay, if I reflect on that, where was the gap? You know, I've been to university, where was the gap? And actually, I then realised it really just came from the fact that I went to public school, because I'm friends with someone who's put their kids through private school, and I realised private education does sometimes include this, and I think in current day it definitely does. So there's an imbalance there, and so the mission that the book is on to share this with you felt like something that I definitely resonated with, and I think is really important. And then that took me to my third and kind of like deeper reflection, which was, how do we get this message across to young people? And I know there's a chapter in the book that speaks about this. One of the things that I came to when I started thinking about this was actually, when did I first come across power in my own life before work? And for me, the scenarios that can play to and relate to young children are mostly the ones they come across in their family, their relationships at home, but also their experiences at school. And again, that catapulted me to two stories where I remember kind of first, you know, embodying my own sense of power. And when I say that, it was as early as nursery. I remember standing my ground about not drinking my milk because I didn't want it. And Margaret Thatcher had decided we should all have milk. And I had decided I don't want it. And so I learned how to wait it out. And so that was me thinking about, actually, that's the first time I remember using my power. And I was at nursery, I was a toddler. So there's something about using those scenarios for me that helps bring this message home for youth that I think would be important in this. And then I suppose the conversation that I don't think we're having yet that we need to have is in two folds. The book talks about quiet power, and I think this is so important, but I think the reason why we can't have a conversation about power is, what does it really mean to people? What are people thinking about when they hear power, is part one of the conversation. And then the second part is, what do we need to do to individually and collectively take responsibility for recognising our own power, but then actually choosing to use it for good?
Thank you, Sam. No,
Shall I jump in?
yeah.
Hi, everyone. If you can't hear me in the back, just wave. I tend to talk louder.
No, that's not going to. Just talk.
Yeah, I'll try and talk as loudly as I can. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much, Sam. I could relate a lot to that. To be honest, the first thing that it stirred in me was a realization that I tend to take a 30-minute no boundaries on what I can do at work, in the sense of every moral and value set in my mind is gone. And so I hope that means that I tend to take, quite a balanced approach to my decisions at work. So if you haven't read that part, essentially, Douglas helped someone for 30 minutes sit down and put aside all of their moral compass and views on what is ethical, what are the rules, what am I not allowed to do, and what appeared to her was essentially all of the options that she didn't think were possible in a very stressful situation. And it kind of opened her mind to see the wider chessboard, in the sense of all of the options that she had. So I realized that I tend to do that quite a lot. And with that, I realized as well that the book is quite hopeful, and the book does something quite powerful, which is give language and texture to quite a dynamic issue. And I think when you have language, when you have terminology, when you have words to express things, it gives power to the reader and people engaging on this topic to really address it, really talk about it in a meaningful manner. I found a couple of terms that I'll be using at work myself. I'll also be using a number of methods, the first aid method of the 5-4-3-2-1 in stressful situations. So really well written and well done to you both. The two things it left me with, though, that I feel I wanted to bring today to the conversation were really on the philosophical side of things. So it was about, in my mind, the paradox of choice and identity. So I come from a background where I've lived across 9 countries. So my earliest experiences with power has been going into new school time and time again, and really trying to figure out within the span of a few days who had power. You know, even at school level, who should I align myself with? Who was I going to have a bit of trouble communicating with? And so I've always found my own struggle with identity to be a source of disorientation in life, and a source of my inability to take power, because I don't know for what, I don't know what's my role, I don't know what I'm thriving towards, and I don't know how to essentially position myself in the game. So when it comes to the paradox of choice, I have to note that the book, does reflect a lot of experiences here, and so it does reflect the reality of modern day society, of places where where the stories are coming from. And in this part of the world, I find, we've been taught the equation of choice means freedom. Freedom of choice means a better life. And you end up being faced with a scenario where you have endless options and endless choices, and you try and fill up your life with all of these things, but to what end? And I feel like that tends to be very much behind, the structure of how we engage with social media, how we engage with growing in the social ladder and striving to achieve, the next best thing and fill my life with things. But at the end of the day, when you are still unsatisfied and unable to define what it is that you're trying to achieve, you still feel lost. And that links to the inner truth. So I did come from Hajj, so I'm going to be a little bit philosophical in the sense of when you let so many external forces influence your thinking, and you struggle to essentially decide on your own what would be the next best step. I find that to be one of the areas that we tend to lose sight of. I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jezz.
Hi everybody, I'm Jezz. Thank you both for your great contributions. I wanted to start by really applauding Douglas and Martin for a particular thing that they do throughout the book, which is bringing in such a wide array of experience. I think Martin mentioned at the beginning, over 60 accounts of real human experiences from people that they have encountered throughout their careers. If you've read my little bio on the paper or in the chat, I'm an anthropologist, or more accurately in training. And one of the things that we try to do is to distill really complex human experiences down in a way that is really true to what has happened and true to the way they understand them, but also to speak between that particular and something more general. And I think that they both do that very well in this account of power. Throughout the book, there's this metaphor that I remember being told about for the first time from Douglas and having some reservations about when Douglas was telling me about the message of the book. And I said, Douglas, I'm thinking about chess. I play chess sometimes. I'm terrible at it. And there's one guy at the back or one guy on either side of the board controlling all of the pieces. And it's precisely the opposite metaphor that's really happening in the book. And it's a metaphor that I think is very powerful. It reminds us that, we are all pieces on a board, but we all possess particular ideas of what types of pieces we are, and particular ideas of what moves are legitimate. We possess different ideas of what it means to win the game, and whether or not that matters. And I thought that was really powerful. As I was reading the book, I spend most of my time at the moment trying to sort of read academically for my PhD. And one of the authors that I read a lot is Pierre Bourdieu, who I know is a huge name that many of you would have encountered. And it's a particular version of Bourdieu that is very successful in management circles. I know Douglas will be familiar with this. And it struck me that there was a lot in there that relates to some of Bourdieu's theories about agents and the fields they operate, the rules of the game that they may or may not be familiar with. One of my favourite sections of the book, and this is what I want to come on to talk about, was the accounts of the schools where some workshops were done. I would really encourage you to engage with that part of the book properly. I mean, as I was reading it the first time, I thought, this seems like a bit like evidence. I might want to skip over this and keep the argument. But it's really, really crucial. In the interim between my undergraduate and postgraduate studies, I had the privilege of teaching at a school. And one of the things that I did is, alongside my responsibilities as a politics teacher, was to sort of design and deliver an enrichment programme, not only to the students at the sixth form I worked at in Great Yarmouth, but to the wider community of secondary and primary schools in the local area. And we delivered one workshop, which was not too dissimilar, actually, to what is described in this book. And it took at its foundation the theorist John Rawls and the idea of the original position, and encouraged the kids, whether or not they were 17 or 18-year-olds, or they were 10, 11-year-olds, to imagine what the world might look like if we strip everything back, if we take a step back to this original position. And I think there's a real power in this book, a real hopeful message. I think it's as much a book about hope as it is a book about power. I've lost my train of thought. I was going to say that I think there's a particular power here in focusing on the younger generation. I mean, I'm 23, so I'm not too far off the 17-year-olds you described. Though when I was teaching them, I felt like I was much, much older. I don't know, there's a bit of a weird generational gap there. Bell Hooks writes about the sort of wandering estrangement of children, the sort of critical curiosity that they possess before we are socialised out of it as we go on into our lives and through our careers. So I think there's a real power in engaging with them. I'll leave it there, but I look forward to speaking to you some more after this ends. Thank you.
So let's thank you, all three of you. What resonances, crossways, sideways, have occurred for you? I know several have occurred for me, but I'll shut up for the moment.
For me, it's what you were just saying about the idea that we all see ourselves as it's the identity piece, and it's absolutely also what you were saying, Nada, as well. For me, the identity piece was really important as a connection through the book, but I think it's an important part of the quiet power that we experience and how society actually can project some of our identity onto us through the categories that are set up. And so one of the definitions of power that I found that I really enjoyed and preferred to think about was and I can't remember whose name it is, so I will find that and share that. But it was the idea that power acts more like a capillary, like capillaries, and everybody has a sense of power, but it's through language, it's through social norms, and those drive the behaviours. And so we are effectively putting ourselves in boxes that are set up by those who drive those categories. And so there's something there about how much of what we believe of ourselves comes from a structure that is already out there. And I had this experience quite early on. So the question I ponder is, how do children decide to tell other children what they can and can't do because of their gender? It's coming from somewhere. I particularly got told I shouldn't play football, so I'm still a bit salty about that because I never got to play.
You had to drink milk.
I had to
and
drink
shouldn't-
milk, and I shouldn't play football. So I'm gonna leave it there. But I think there's something about identity and how the structure of society sets us up to be put into boxes, and that comes from power as well.
Could I try joining that, Nada? Because I was very struck that when you talked about the emptiness of choice,
Yeah.
and you were kind of both explicitly and implicitly talking with the benefits of the so many cultures that you have deeply inhabited.
Well, it's almost by design.
Yeah. There is a part of the book where we go beyond what I summarised, and we really try and we call it power rebooted. Let's go back to the beginning and ask, what do we think a human individual is? And if we try different ways of thinking about that, what does that do to our idea of power? And what does that do to our ability to explain what goes on in the world? So when I think of the emptiness of choice, and I also think, conscious also of my age, looking at a digital world that's largely alien or not inside me, I see a world, we seem to have created a world which I call connection everywhere, but not a drop to drink. We are in The Guardian today, a major commentator was saying, we're so connected, but we've never been more alone. And this aloneness, which at least in this country, and particularly the Anglo-American West, we are brought up to feel that we can fill that aloneness by greater consumption
Exactly.
and greater choice, comes from, we suggest in the book, or at least we invite in the later stages of the book, to reconsider the possibility that in the Anglo-American West, we have inherited a wrong idea about what it is to be a human individual, a very enclosed, walled-off idea of human individuality. And Martin and I, for separate reasons, drew inspiration from South Africa and from a Southern African concept called Ubuntu. And one of the reasons I'm really happy to be here in London Interdisciplinary School is they have a meeting room called Ubuntu. Not many universities have that, but it's too small for us. We offer, Martin and I, in the book, a different translation of Ubuntu, where we translate Ubuntu as parts of you are buried in diverse others. Parts of you are buried in diverse others. And this is meant to suggest, it's a hypothesis for you to consider, not a truth descended from heaven. It's to suggest that actually in our emptiness and loneliness, we fail to seek out the kind of vulnerable and deeper connections with others, which would provide the flourishing of our true individuality. And that when Martin talked about the possibility of power becoming beautiful, one of the ways we get there is by saying, well, actually, it turns out if you change your idea about what it is to be a human individual, then it automatically changes your idea of what you think power is about. Does that, Nada, make any...
Exactly. So thank you so much. Because I had lost my train of thought earlier, and that was exactly what I was trying to explain as well, in the sense of it's almost by design, right? Mm-hmm. That you were very much inspired by Foucault's, invisible cloak, and the power that produces, that essentially makes you think that you're taking the decision, and it's like the quiet power that you also reference to in the book. I feel like society is only baking that more and more in the technological systems that are powering, marketing for companies, social media, and what it really means to be successful in today's world. And I feel very, very deeply towards what you mentioned in terms of how it is to be a good human. So if you look back, one great writer and philosopher called Aboserie, he essentially defined, your body as an outer shell, but that it contained an inner kingdom, and your heart is the soul. It's who you are deep within, but you're a king in your kingdom, and you're advised by a vizier, a prime minister, who's the wise one. You have a money collector who represents desire and passion and temptation. You have the police force that represents anger, and you have your foot soldiers. And that kingdom is within you, and as you go through life, you might find yourself in situations where the vizier has too much power, so you're too cautious, or the police is starting to harm people with no good reason and is just always angry. And these moments of domination of voices within you that kind of cloud out the soul, the heart, who you are, is a human experience that we're all in at different stages. And so with that sort of underpinning philosophy in my mind, when I'm in a situation where I feel like the power dynamic doesn't make sense or something is unfair, I try as much as I can to imagine all of the scenarios possible, and you reference that in the book as well, to try and avoid being paranoid and try to give the benefit of the doubt, but also to genuinely think about the experience that the other person is going through and how I can best communicate to them in that scenario, and not necessarily take an upper hand or gain power, go into the seesaw situation, but also essentially bring my truth. And that could, in essence, bring something that they haven't seen. So I try as much as I can to communicate in that manner, and with that philosophy in mind. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation as well.
Martin and Jezz, and then let's take questions.
Yeah, I'd like to build on that, because you talk about that sort of kingdom and all of those things going on within you. And I think the other dimension that we look at is it's going on within all of us. And we are blessed to have two case studies towards the very end of the book that have been given to us by Rebecca and Artie. And we've also blessed by the way that they look into the system and see that actually we're all a part of it, and all of that is a part of us. So one of the things that I've been brought up to think about was this idea that was given to me, which is conflict is your greatest resource. So when you see things going awry, the normal temptation is to run away from it. But I find myself becoming even more curious, saying, so what's actually being offered to us and to me? And I mean, one of the people that we pay tribute to is John Bazalgette and the Grub Institute. And they have actually given me a really profound understanding about our identity, which is not just within, and it's not just a me, it's really a collective us. So the big question is, well, what are we here for? We end, what is possible? What can we do together as Homo sapiens?
No, I agree. And as much as there's a lot of hope, one thing that I really admired in the book is that you even brought your own individual experiences where you may have found yourself in a situation where you went in flight mode and you fled a scenario. And so we've all found ourselves in rooms where we're seeing something play out. I myself in my day-to-day job is literally translating what big tech wants to do to governments across emerging markets. And I see the power dynamic, and to be a good consultant in that space, you essentially have to figure out what they could bring to the table and what could they say to position them in the seesaw a bit with the upper hand, and you're constantly playing with that dynamic.
Let's just take questions.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Trish, do we have any questions from online?
We do.
Shall we take 2 questions from online?
One at the moment.
All right, okay, give me the online question, then we'll take a question from the room.
So it's about identity. Do you think that the focus on individual identity is what is driving a disproportionate power structure rather than focusing on things like collective power?
So do you think that too much of a focus on individual identity is driving? This picks up very much what we've just been talking about. So I don't know if one of us would like to build on that.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Cool. I have a particular interpretation of this question. I come here from spending most of my time reading and writing about social mobility, and there's sort of this change that we're starting to see discursively from both from government, particularly from our maybe future Prime Minister Andy Burnham, and also big organisations in the space. Is they're challenging this idea that we've had historically that social mobility is about the individual being plucked out of their community, being plucked out of the place of origin, and being allowed to climb the ladder. Right? A particular meritocratic progress narrative that sees the most successful individuals taken from the places of their creation and coming to places like London, where they are to be successful. And I really like this idea of Ubuntu in the book. And it reminded me of some of the big ideas we have in anthropology. For example, individualism is a similar concept, the idea that we are never individuals. There are always people involved in our creation, right? And we are involved also in their creation. So I do absolutely think that this particular idea of the individual, this Western idea of the individual, is crucial in understanding the way that inequality and power concentration exists in this country. But I do think that we're beginning to see a little bit of a change.
Thank you. Can I take a question from in the room? And now I feel like a teacher with a class.
Yes.
I'll help you out, Douglas. What are you now curious about after this experience of working with people on this topic, examining your own experience? Where are you now? What's the question you're sitting with now?
So the question to us is, what is the question we are now curious about? What question is sitting with us? Thank you, Rebecca. Martin, do you want to go
No,
first?
I need a bit of time because it's such a good question. I want to reserve the right some space to think about that one.
I am really curious to see whether or not any of the structures of official power within this country in relation to education are persuadable. I'm not starting out from a very optimistic place, but we're doing various things. We have got a member of the House of Lords who is willing to approach, there's The Economist has set up an education commission sitting right now, because we are thinking in this country of England, or England and Wales, we are thinking of giving the vote to 16-year-olds. And obviously Martin and I think, wouldn't it be a good idea not just to give them the vote at a time when so many voters feel powerless, but to actually give young people the educational and communication resources they need to actually be powerful in their exercise not only of a vote. And all my liberation theology, analysis of power, and my own psychological Douglas expect failure and you won't be disappointed, all point towards saying, no, those structures will just not move an inch. But my curiosity is to see whether they do, whether I'm just being unduly pessimistic. One thing I'm very happy though, is based on this book, which I had no idea before we started this book. Can I let you in on a secret? In a way, I don't really care whether they do pay any attention or not, because this knowledge structure about power is getting swept away, whether they do anything about it or not. And once people realise, and once young people realise, that there is knowledge that can help them, that is not about distant career outcomes or being useful units of labour in the capitalist economy, but go directly to what's happening in playgrounds, in life choices, as well as work situations. You will not be able, the establishment will not be able at that point to stop the knowledge circulating. So that I don't need to be curious about. But actually I'm trying to be curious and not rather than just assume negatives about how powers that be in education might react. Akil.
From my observation, and you've spoken to some of this already, so it might be a bit of a recap. But from my observation, what I can acknowledge is that power is being held for less and less amounts of time, right? And power is being held for less and less amounts of time. And what I'm curious to learn about is how power can be held for longer, but for longer in benefit of more people. Because, like, say the political landscape that we look at, the tenure of our prime ministers are what? 18 months, 24 months, you know, and that's a big shift from having full terms, right? And so that's being driven from the fact that they are in power but not serving others, right? And so I'm keen to understand the summary of lessons from your experience and from your writing, both of you, to listen to how someone can hold power for a long period of time but serve the community that they're intended to serve. Maybe we can.
I'm going
Okay, so I'm going to come back. I'm going to come back in as respectful way as possible. But as soon as you say that, there's an element in which I'm not going to be respectful, because I actually want to challenge you on that. I am disconcerted, if I've understood you correctly, about referencing people holding power for shorter periods of time and then it goes, and how's that going to influence, as if it's out there. I am really curious if people reading this book actually understand we have all the power that we need here and now in this very moment. I have the power to challenge you about your particular way, and I can do it here and now. I can create some conflict around that so that we shift and move things on. So I'm really curious if people reading this book actually sort of think, do you know what? I can start holding on to power, making a difference right now.
Well, let me say something different, Martin, because I relate to what Akil said, that I see an increasing amount of instability around power. And I think that anyone who reads the book will discover that you've been Vicar of Dartford for 33 years, a position which you tell us in the book, and I applaud you for doing it, you got thanks to your father, or thanks to...
Yes.
So, in one way, I think Martin may have the secret for how to have power for a very long time and use it for good. And there are people here from his congregation who can tell you whether he does use it for good or not. But I recognise the instability. I'm not sure I've got an answer, but I've got something which I'd like to invite you to think about. We are saying that all the people who we assume know something about power, like we don't think Keir Starmer did, but Keir Starmer had his dark garden gnome, Morgan McSweeney. We might think Boris Johnson knows something, but there's a range of people who, whether we like them or their ethics or not, we think they know something about power. This book says they don't. They don't, none of them. And actually, it doesn't prove the book's right, but it's consistent with the book. If we have growing instability in people holding power, one possible explanation for that is that we're actually becoming more aware that a lot of the people who we have assumed or go around as if they do know about power actually don't know what they're doing. And that may speak to some of the rise of populism and that whole thing of kind of the no longer respecting the political class in the way that, to some extent, in the more stable society we did. So perhaps that instability could be that we're actually, which is our thesis, that we're at peak blind spot, and the secret is going to come out. And we hope that this book is part of the secret coming out. We are at the time when I'm going to do the thank yous. If you're in the room, we are here at your mercy, and drinks will be available very shortly. And if you are online, Martin and I will pick up, we know we have 2 more questions, we will be picking those up tomorrow morning, and we will be posting by Sunday on Human Chess Info our answers, and perhaps we should find a way whereby you can post your marks out of 10 for our answers. But we have some thank yous to do, because we want to end as time we promised. The website accompanying the book is humanchess.info. It contains a range of free resources to download, including the full versions of the case studies that Martin mentioned. And it also contains, if you want, clickable versions of there are references throughout the book to various information sources, and on the website there are clickable versions of those references. There would be no human chess idea without 2 teachers who I think are here, Pani Matsangos, I've seen Pani, and Alec waving at the back, and Alexandra Hamill, who opened their classroom doors to enable us to see what conversations about power were possible with 17-year-olds.
And we'd like to thank the creativity given to us by the poets in the book, particularly Kathleen Musto, Ansuya Patel, Rachel Alban, and Marie Papier. The latter 2 are online, so thank you very much for participating. Thanks also to Rebecca O'Rourke and Artie Kapoor for your wonderful case studies. They are downloadable in full, and I recommend that you do that. Thanks to our editor, James Nightingale, and our designer, Steve Laird, and the whole publishing team at iBooks. That's Dan Hiscocks and Will Atkinson for actually backing us. It's been fab. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you for taking part in person or online. If you use social media, we suggest the hashtag #HumanChess in what you post. We want to thank Olivier Chapman, who is director of the Aspen UK Foundation, and Aspen UK Rising Leader Nada, and all the Aspen UK Rising Leaders online. Thank you for allowing us to be part of what you're doing. If you order the Blindspot from the iBooks website by Sunday and use the code ASPEN, A-S-P-E-N, at the checkout, Dan's going to give you 30% off. Martin and I dedicated this book to 3 people. They are on the website, and you can read about them in the acknowledgements, but we're delighted to have John Bazalgette with us, and we want to greet remotely Jane Brown and Carol Biertger, Jane in England and Carol in South Africa. We treasure, Martin and I, with the greatest fondness and respect, our memories of Geoffrey and David, who are the other 2 people, to whom, the other 2 inspirations, to whom we dedicate the book. Finally, without Sam, Nada and Jezz, this would have been a traditional book launch by 2 old farts. Thank you for helping us start a vital, radical conversation and expanding it. We invite you to join and expand the conversation, and to do it tomorrow in a conversation that you have with someone of whatever age who is caught up in a game that no one has taught them how to play. From today, one of 2 things is going on: the blind spot or the conversation. Our book predicts the conversation goes on and wins. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dan Hiscocks, as you will have gathered, who has been Martin and Douglas's publisher for the last 8 years. Publishing is always an act of optimism. It begins with an idea, grows through hundreds of conversations, months of and years of work, and eventually becomes something that leaves the safety of the author's desks and enters the world. And tonight is that moment of Blindspot. I want to spend less time talking about the book now, because we've had that, which has been wonderful. So thank you for your contributions to that, Sam, Nada and Jezz. But I want to talk about the two people who wrote it briefly. Douglas has had an unusually varied career. He worked in the UK Treasury, became a headhunter and executive coach, has written extensively about leadership and power, and is a visiting professor at universities. He's the author of several books, including Elites, which the Financial Times described as profound, subversive, and often very funny. What strikes me about Douglas is not the breadth of his experience, impressive though that is, it is his willingness to keep asking difficult questions. Many people spend their careers navigating organisations. Douglas has spent much of his trying to understand why organisations so often fail the very people inside them. That curiosity sits at the heart of this book. Martin brings something quite different, and perhaps even rarer. He served for decades as the Church of England priest and community leader while holding responsibilities in health, education and community development. His work has placed him in contact with people at some of the most important and vulnerable moments of their lives. The combination of Douglas and Martin is unusual. I was trying to think of a joke along the lines of an academic businessman and a vicar walking to the pub, but I couldn't quite get the right line to follow it with. In essence, they're a leadership thinker and executive coach alongside a parish priest trained in group analysis. One shaped by boardrooms and senior appointments, and the other by communities, congregations and public service, yet both arrived at the same conclusion. The people constantly affected by power, but are rarely given the language or understanding to make sense of it. This book is not a product of a fashionable trend or a publishing brainstorm. It's the result of 2 lives spent observing people, listening carefully, comparing notes, and asking why so many intelligent, capable and decent individuals find themselves blindsided by forces they cannot explain. What excites me as a publisher is that this conversation has the potential to reach far beyond the traditional book audience. That brings me to the most important thing I want to say this evening. A launch event does not make a book successful. Publicity helps, social media helps, but what really matters is people. Books succeed because readers decide they're worth talking about. Every person in this room tonight has a network that we don't have. Colleagues, friends, family, professional contacts, fellow leaders, teachers, students, congregations, book clubs, people who trust your judgment. If this book resonates with you, please don't let it stop with your own copy. Buy it, certainly, and there are some for sale tonight. But recommend it, post about it, give it as a gift, mention it in conversations, introduce it to people who need it the most. The success of the Blindspot will not ultimately be measured by tonight's launch. It will be measured by whether those conversations spread from this room to the wider world. So on behalf of iBooks, thank you for coming, thank you for supporting the book, and above all, thank you for supporting Douglas and Martin, whose commitment, courage and persistence have brought us to this moment. I'd like to welcome in the Blindspot into the world, and please look forward to chatting and having a drink. And the drinks are at the back of the room, as are copies of the book if you want to have a look at it and maybe vibe on. Thanks for coming. There you go.